our top story this week is there are all these startups now that are trying to replace QuickBooks to be the next QuickBooks. And the approach is just fascinating. So where do you want to start?
We can jump into that.
Which one do you want to start with? Because there's Teal and there's Layer. Those are the
There's
two that I
Teal
know.
and there's Layer. And we can rewind a little bit. I've always said, right, the biggest, and on the show before, the biggest threat to QuickBooks is probably Square making a GL. I think we even had an episode titled that once, right? Because they had a blog post about how they have a GL, or Shopify having a GL, because that really takes QuickBooks out of the picture. If you're an e-commerce business, you start on Shopify, you're getting your payments on Shopify, everything you're doing is on Shopify. Well, now your GL is there too. You're never going to buy QuickBooks. And the same with Square. You're in the Square ecosystem. Why would you buy QuickBooks?
Well, and I got to stop you there for a second because our live stream viewers have joined us. And Gator NYC says, when sea levels rise and the land disappears, that's when QuickBooks will be dethroned. I imagine.
I think they said that's when you depreciate land. I think we got an accounting question in the chat right out of the gate. I don't know. We depreciate land.
Well, okay. So these startups are taking a unique approach.
And if you imagine the apps that are out there like Toast, what if Toast, which the restaurant is using for their whole tech stack, now has a GL?
Mm-hmm.
Because I think we've talked about in the past how a company like Toast added their own payroll. And some crazy 60, 70% of every person that gets a new Toast account just uses the Toast payroll. They don't go shopping for an ADP, a Gusto, an OnPay, et cetera.
Right. Yeah. Because if the built-in functionality is good enough, you're going to use that. Why go get something else outside of the system you're using to run your business?
Exactly. And then these two startups, coincidentally, so Layer is one of them, layerfi.com. It's started by a former product leader on Square's banking team and a former engineer at Wealthfront. And the other company that's coming out to attack is Teal. So it's teal.dev. That is a former Shopify founder and then the former founder of Bench, Ian Crosby, who I think most of the listeners may or may not be familiar with. So two of the companies that I've always thought could disrupt QuickBooks, they have employees now building something to disrupt QuickBooks. Right? That's a way to think about this.
And Teal announced an $8 million seed investment. They raised $8 million. And that's the one with Ian Crosby, the founder of Bench.
That's correct. And
he's the CEO.
He's the CEO, founder, right? Yeah, or founder, CEO of Bench. And I think he left Bench, though, recently.
I'm saying he's the CEO of Teal now.
He's one of the two founders, yes.
Yeah.
I don't know
in this article, he's described as, in this press release, he is described as the CEO of Teal.
Okay. So he's the CEO now. So think about it this way. You could build, quote unquote, an accounting system in 4 weeks. So ultimately, it's bank feeds accounting. So you have an API to pull down the bank feeds and categorize. And then it has another bank feed that lets you basically pull out your statements, right? So you can embed this inside your other apps, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you don't have to have, in theory, they want to kind of be the GL a little bit, right? But if
not just a little bit, that's it. That's what they built. It's a GL with APIs, so you can plug this GL into any application.
Yeah.
And this is the problem with QuickBooks. We were just talking about this. I was just talking about this with a developer yesterday, is that a lot of the functionality in QuickBooks is not exposed via the API. So there's a lot you can't do when you want to plug into it as a developer. Like the bank feeds are not exposed.
Intuit did shut down their bank feeds API a while ago.
The transactions that are sitting there in the reconcile screen or whatever they call it, you can't change those via the API. So you can't build an app that will categorize people's transactions for them.
Yes. Yeah. But most of the fields in QuickBooks are exposed. Like QuickBooks Invoice API is probably bigger than most companies' APIs, and that's the struggle with these, right?
Mm-hmm.
And a thing like this. I get the value prop. Like, if I just use something like Teal, I don't have to go integrate with Stripe and integrate with all these companies. I kind of have this middleman app that's going to do a lot of this stuff for me. Mm-hmm. And they're great on paper. And every 3, 4, 5 years, we see an app kind of pop up like this. But it's very, very hard. And speaking from experience, Intuit tried to do it just for QuickBooks and QuickBooks Desktop, kind of one API to rule them all. And it was impossible. They had to kill the project after 4 years, 5 years. It's impossible to build this one API that rules everything. But getting into Layer a little bit. So Layer is another interesting one. So Layer just wants to be a GL as a service. So if you think about that, where instead of
that's what I was saying about Teal.
yeah.
All right, how are they different?
So
they're not, right?
Just give me
they're
a second.
The same thing.
They're very similar. They're very, very similar. It's the way they're marketing it. It's a little bit different. So Teal's trying to still be a full-blown accounting system, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Layer's trying to be like, hey, you're doing all the stuff in your thing. You pass data to us as a GL, and we'll let you pull reports back out.
Okay, so Teal is building a front end to
They're
go
not
with their
really
back
building
end.
It's not really a front end in the same way.
Well, if it's going to be standalone accounting software, it's got to have like a user interface, right? So
well, it's still, I would build on it. So I still have an app, and I want to build features and functions using their back end. So it's a faster way to develop. So instead of me connecting to Gusto and maybe for payroll and connecting to APIs for Stripe and connecting to APIs to bank feeds like Plaid, I could use a tool like Teal to cut that down, right? And so now I'm using them as a little bit like a GL, where all the transactions are getting sucked into one place, right? And it becomes a platform. And Layer's kind of doing the same thing in a way, right? But both ultimately are kind of just like bank feed accounting. They're sucking in the bank feeds, and then it pulls them on, they're categorizing it, and then you as a developer now can show a profit and loss statement in your app. So if I'm Toast, I can now have the bank feed suck in to Toast, and I can suck using something like Layer. Actually, I think Toast is one of their 4 customers. They'll suck down the bank feed. Layer's going to categorize that, and then Layer provides some API to push out profit and loss balance sheet back into Toast, right? So now Toast customers will have an accounting system, right? Ultimately. And you can see niche apps like Clio law firm software. If the lawyer's in the law firm software 12 hours a day, why not just have the profit and loss there? This really makes a lot of sense on paper.
Yeah. Right? The vast majority of small businesses, this is what they need. Yes. And they would be happy to have this in whatever system they use to run their business.
And the funny thing is, now which one is it? I have a note here. If you go into teal.dev and you look at their developer docs, one of the major pieces of their documentation is how to connect it to QuickBooks, right? So at the end of the day,
right,
like these products like this, yes, they want to replace QuickBooks, but at the end of the day, go ask Xero. Xero spent $1.5 billion now, maybe $2 billion in the U.S. market to kill QuickBooks. It's very hard. So even if you have the technology to build everything, Intuit is a marketing machine. It's very hard. You're probably still going to have to play nice and work with QuickBooks at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a little tough. But there's an example of a company that's kind of doing this at a smaller scale.